Welcome back, Captains, to another episode of Starfleet Academy Online. I'm your host and instructor, Hale Bohse, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about ship weapons. All right, so I'm really excited to talk to you about ship weapons now because I've been dying to actually dig in with you a little bit on this stuff. And this is probably going to be a slightly longer video because I have a lot of information to share about ship weapons. Okay, so let's not waste any time. Let's get started. So, what I'm going to go through today is actually right here. I'm going to go through my forward weapons, I'm going to go through my aft weapons, and I'm going to go through another type of weapon which I haven't even talked about yet in this series. But let's talk about weapon types. So, not only do you have to worry about weapon type and the specific weapons that I've chose, but remember when we back a couple of episodes when I told you I was going to introduce you to a new build that wouldn't cost you a lot to get a hold of and still be very highly effective. Well, I went ahead and put together that build for you so you could see what it would look like outside of the skill planner, so that you could see what it should look like in game, and you can get familiar with how to position things and why we do things the way that we do when we're building starships. So keep in mind that there's no one way to do this. Really, you can choose to do anything you want. You can choose whatever energy type you want, whatever weapon type you feel most comfortable with, but there is a major difference to those choices that you need to be aware of so that you can build out the way that you want to play. But I'm going to give you some advice for effectiveness that I think has been really handy. And I've chosen, or Lanta and I have both chosen actually, cannons for this particular build. Originally, when I started playing, I was all over the place. I was doing like cannons, I had a couple of beam arrays, I had an omni beam, I had a torpedo. Like, I thought I was doing really, really well because, I was just looking straight up at the little DPS marker on these particular, weapons to see, like, well, if it's a higher DPS for base damage, shouldn't I just use that one? No, that's not how this actually works. So we just went through energy type in the last episode, and we've kind of gone over like why that's important in unifying all of that. But there's another way to unify all your weapons, and that's for your weapon type. So there are three or four basic types of weapons. The first one is cannons, which go with turrets. Okay, and that's something you need to know too. Cannons and turrets are cannon weapon damage. Beams, arrays, and dual beams are, of course, beam damage, but also omni beams are also beam damage. So there's three types of beams that you could get going there. And then finally, there's torpedoes, which are, can be effective depending upon the types of build that you're putting together. And then, of course, there are experimental weapons, which we haven't even gone into in this series yet. And so we'll talk about each of those types. But first, for this particular build, we've put together the build for a phaser dual heavy cannon setup up front, and I want to talk to you about a little bit about what these are and why we've chosen these. Well, first of all, we've chosen all of these because all of these different weapons come from either missions in the game, from straight up from just buying them from the fleet using fleet credits, or doing, like your reputations or something like that, where you're able to craft them in your reputations. You can also craft weapons if you're doing R&D, and that's important to know, especially if you're looking for that pen modifier, and I know we haven't gone over those yet, but we'll do that pretty soon. So let's start off with, these are all phaser weapons, but you're going to notice that they're all different types of phaser weapons, or they're not different types, but they're different dual heavies. They're all different versions of the dual heavy phaser cannons. So why do that? Why not just have one unified if it's so important to keep them unified? Well, the answer to that question is the procs. So each of these different types of dual heavy cannons, even though they're all phaser, they all have different types of procs that they do. And I don't want just one type of proc that can only be applied so many times to an enemy. I want a lot of different procs that can be applied multiple times to an enemy, because that's going to cause a lot more devastation. And so if we're going to start thinking about how to start stacking our damage and start really increasing our effectiveness against our enemies, whether that be PvP or PvE, I think we need to start looking at those procs and really honing in on what those do. And this is how you do that. So when you hover over the weapon, just like I've done here, one of the things you're going to notice is that, which is really, really nice. And you're going to see skills that affect that ability are the Starship Exotic Particle Generator, which will improve exotic damage, or the Starship Drain Expertise, which will improve your ability to drain shields or resist somebody draining your shields. So that's something that's pretty nice. So check that out. And start really looking into the weapons that you're using so you can put together a set that's really nice. Now I'm going to introduce the Terran Task Force Phaser Dual Heavy Cannons. These are outstanding weapons. If you're not using them and you're using Phaser or Disruptor, well, you need to build them out like immediately. Don't be stupid. Get in there and get it done. Here's why. Because the modifiers on these are outstanding. So again, you're having that 4% extra crit severity stacking up to 3 times for 15 seconds. One of the procs for this is the Withering Radiation, which does an excessive amount of damage. And I mean, it's not excessive. It's only 750 damage, but it can stack up to 5 times. So you can have a lot of damage ticking down on somebody when you're applying that stack of radiation, and it lasts for 60 seconds. That's a long time to be ticking damage constantly, you know what I mean? And that's a lot of damage to tick. So again, that's just going to stack on top of all the other damage that you're doing. And one thing that I haven't talked about when it comes to reputation, or I might have mentioned it before, but you need to keep in mind that in addition to these procs, and the 4%, the 4% chances to stack up your crit severity, it's also doing something that in green, if you're reading the screen here, it says there's a 2% bonus all damage. That is incredibly significant because it doesn't matter if you're doing torpedo damage or kinetic damage, phaser damage, whatever other energy type you're using, whatever types of damage you're doing, it's going to increase all of it by not tier 1 but tier 2 damage. Now, we haven't talked about that a lot yet, tier 1 and tier 2, but tier 1 just refers to the base damage that a weapon will do, whereas tier 2 is like part of the multiplier that applies to that base weapon damage. So this is that tier 2 level. Whenever you see that bonus term, that's tier 2 damage, and you definitely want that. And the way to get it is when you're doing your reputations, if you craft a piece within that reputation like I do here, so I'll go to my Terran Task Force, we'll select a slot here, and we'll go down, and you can, here it is. You can see the Terran Task Force Phasers or the Terran Task Force Disruptor right here. And so they're both dual heavy cannons, but the first one that you're going to have access to are the Disruptors at tier 5. It's only when you hit tier 6 that you get the phaser variant. So you really are going to want to work on your reputations, because in doing so, it's going to add effectiveness really quickly. And everything that I craft within the Terran Task Force that's a weapon is going to have that extra +2 bonus all damage. So when we go back to my ship, there's a few other things that I've crafted over here from a reputation, and they're all giving me that 2% all bonus damage. So that's a total of like 8% for all the different ones that I've crafted. That's a total of 8% bonus all weapon damage. That's tier 2 damage again, and that is going to be a significant multiplier. So get your reputations to tier 6. It is going to make a difference, and you're going to want a lot of cool stuff crafted, okay? So anyway, going back to this, make sure you're taking advantage of those things. Let's talk a little bit more about modifiers, though, because I haven't done that yet. There's a lot of debate on what's going to be better, whether it's like a crit D modifier or a damage modifier. What modifiers are you looking for when it comes to weapons? Well, there's accuracy, there's damage, there's crit D, there's crit H, there's crit X, there's a lot of different types. And so when you're looking at trying to like re-engineer an item, which we won't go over now, like how to do that, but you can re-engineer some of your weapons, and not all of them, but you should be able to re-engineer a lot of them. And when you're re-engineering those, you can choose what modifiers are applied to that weapon. So crit D again is crit severity, which again increases the amount of extra damage done when you critically strike. Crit H is how often you critically strike. Damage is increasing the base damage of that particular weapon. For and you can stack that multiple times, and that's going to be a significant amount of extra damage. I recommend, when it comes to cannons, either straight damage or crit D. I don't recommend going with much anything else, because I have found that when it comes to DPS, just in testing between, if you're using a DPS meter like Nexus, or if you're using the combat log reader, whatever you're using to test your DPS, you want to really switch between those two, and those are the two that really amp up your DPS a little bit more. And keep in mind, it's only applied to that weapon for that modifier, but that stacks on top of all the other stats increases that you're getting from like your consoles and your devices and your other weapons and ship equipment. So that's something to really take a look at and really pay attention to. Next, I'm going to talk about torpedoes, because this is a pretty run-of-the-mill torpedo, but it is part of the quantum phase set, and that's why I'm using it in this case, because putting an extra cannon on there would be might be a little more ideal for when you're doing straight up damage, but that extra set bonus is what's actually making up the difference there. And so instead of putting an extra cannon, having that extra fire, being able to apply 2,865 damage to like 10 different targets within my 135 degree targeting arc, that's going to do more damage than whatever I'm doing with an extra cannon. So not only am I going to get to apply my 7,471 kinetic damage to a target, theoretically, I am also going to be able to do, hopefully, to proc this extra damage, that will, will cause that much damage per second for 10 seconds. That's a lot. It also has the bonus of increase or decreasing your enemy's subsystems and increasing your subsystems power. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you look, here are your subsystems. So there's weapons, shields, engines, and auxiliary. And when you're looking at those, these power levels, the reason it's 84 out of 50 is because I'm boosting those power levels with modifiers like that. And so if that were to apply to my enemy stacking up to 10 times, well, that could be an extra 28 extra power that I'm going to have in each of those categories, which is going to increase the effectiveness of all of those different things. If it's to engines, I'm going to go faster. If it goes to auxiliary, it just means anything that with exotic particle generator or other items that use auxiliary power, will have an increased effectiveness. My shields will be stronger, my weapons will be stronger, and so that's how that kind of works. And so you want to make sure that you're paying attention to that kind of thing, and that's why I have a torpedo on this particular build. Otherwise, I would not, if it didn't give me that bonus. Now let's look at the back of the aft weapons of the ship. I use turrets. The reason I use turrets and I don't use omni beams, or I don't use beam arrays, is because if I'm going to match up my damage, my weapon type, turrets are another form of cannon. And so all of these here are crafted from my reputation again, and they all have different types of procs. And again, that's something you're going to want, because it just multiplies the crap that you're going to throw at your enemy, which is going to be a lot more effective that way. So take a look at that. See what the modifiers here. This biomolecular incubation can be really nice. Again, it's another stacking radiation damage, which could be nice, and it reduces your enemy's flight speed here. This can turn their engines offline, which is great, and it can also stack more crit severity, which is awesome. But here's something I just got through telling you, that I don't use omni beams on my cannon builds, but so why do I have this omni beam here? Well, the answer is because this is a very special omni beam that you can get from your Omega reputation. So if you're going over to your reputation, you go to Task Force Omega, scroll all the way down, boom, here's like the Borg set, and this is where you can get this cutting beam. And this cutting beam actually deals kinetic damage, which is the same type of damage as your torpedo does. And so take a look at that. It also has a 2-second recharge time, gives that +2 bonus all damage proc. And what the fact that I have a 2 set from this set, the modifier is the that Omega Weapons Amplifier, which gives a +10 to your weapon power. So to that subsystem, it's going to increase the power levels by 10, which is great. Increase your power drain resistance, so like the Borg can't drain your shields with their tractor beam as nearly as easily. 500% more resistance to that. 500% less weapon cost to you every time you're firing your weapons. That's huge, because that basically means you're not going to run out of power ever. You could just fire and just absolutely shower them with cannon weapon damage, and you're just going to be able to do it all day long. So that's a very effective thing to be applying. And if you want to know more about the set bonus, here it is. It tells you exactly the same thing right here, so you can see what that amplifier does. So that's pretty cool right there. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk to you about when it comes to weapons is the experimental weapon. Now, not all ships have these, and you need to know that. This one is on the Fleet Tactical version of the Tier 6 version of this Defiant class ship that I'm working with, the USS Cisco. And it does have an experimental weapon slot. And in this case, I've slotted the Voice of the Prophets, which is something that comes off the anniversary, like an old anniversary ship. It was a Bajoran ship that we got for an anniversary event one time, and it is absolutely incredibly effective. Most experimental weapons targeting arcs are 360, just like an Omni Beam, just like a turret. But these usually do an exceptional amount of damage, and it's just one extra weapon that you can constantly be, firing at your enemies with. So it's definitely great to have, because instead of like a 4-3, it's more like the ship has a 4-4, and it only applies to these special weapons. Now, the one that you would get if you got this ship just straight out of space dock or something is the experimental hyper excited ion stream projector. So it's not, in my opinion, it's not as good of a weapon, but it is 360 degrees. It is electrical damage, which is a different damage type than a lot of the others. So again, it's a little bit different, but it's just extra damage that you could be doing that could be really, really effective for you. One of the things I didn't talk about when it comes to cannon weapons, and this is something that I should have told you, is using dual heavy cannons actually affects how you fly. Okay, and when I say how you fly, I mean literally how you fly your ship. In order to do this, you have a 45-degree targeting arc for your cannons, and that's something that's not thought about a lot. And so it affects how you have to fly your ship in order to actually target your enemies and do the damage that you're supposed to be doing. So in this case, you have to aim your ship within that 45 targeting degree arc cone. But, if you were doing like dual beams or beam arrays, well, dual beams have like a 90 degree targeting arc, and beam arrays have like a 250 degree targeting arc. So a lot of people, if they don't really know how to fly their ship well or don't want to be bothered with that, then they typically go beams. But I'm going to tell you something that I think is going to be really important, and that's especially if you're just starting off, start learning how to fly your ship with cannons. And the reason that's going to be so important is because you will thank me for it later, especially if you get into PvP or if you get into those high-end PvEs. Knowing how to fly your ship is going to be one of the most important things that you can do in this game to increase your effectiveness. So you might as well start practicing now using the lowest targeting arc that you're going to have available. That's only going to make you better in the long run. So think about that in the meantime. Otherwise, what do you think about weapons? Which types do you use? Which do you think are most effective? Are you using mines, torpedoes, cannons? Are you using beams? Discuss that in the section below. Thank you so much for tuning in and sticking with us for this long. I really, really appreciate your support. And if you like the content that you received today, please make sure to give us a Hail Bohse, smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because that really helps us out as well. Thanks again for tuning in, and remember, boldly go.
Legends never die when the world is calling you. Can you hear them scream? die. They become a part of you.